If you don't talk about what happened, it will be forgotten. If it is forgotten, it will be as if it never happened. We have to talk about it, about what was hardly talked about in the news, about what is simplified or denied in the media. I was there. I lived through it, the Hezbollah shelling in northern Israel. And I want to talk about that experience. But how do you talk about something that cannot be described in words? How can you make war and terror understandable for those who did not experience it, on their own skin and in their own homes? My name is Sarah Maria Zander. I come from Germany and I'm an activist and freelance journalist. In spring 2024, I decided to go to Israel to report on the war and terror from there. I spent the last few months in northern Israel, close to the Lebanese border. When I look at these videos now, I can hardly believe that we really experienced all of that. It feels surreal. I worked together with the German-Israeli Alon David from kibbutz Dan, a place close to the border with Lebanon. Alon took me to the north of Israel and made it possible for me to experience and document all of this. And with the German journalist Tobias Huch, who came to us for a week in October 2024. The Hezbollah shelling was completely indiscriminate and was not aimed at military targets, but at civilians, civilian facilities and houses. All villages and kibbutzim in the border region were evacuated. Huge fires spread throughout the region, hitting nature and forests that were on fire. We were in the middle of a war. Every day we documented what was happening. We spent countless hours in Alon's car, driving from one deserted place to another. Almost 100,000 Israelis had to leave their homes, including many families with children. Because of the shelling, the region became completely uninhabitable. I don't know how many sirens we experienced. There were countless.
Auf dem Boden, Sarah, auf dem Boden. Leg dich hin.
The country endured constant shelling by Hezbollah for almost a year. The world looked away and ignored it.
Wir sind jetzt wieder aus dem Auto raus, Schutzweste und Schutzausrüstung ist an. Wir sind hier in der Nähe von Kiryat Shmona.
Only when Israel's army finally made the decision to fight these attacks and end the terror did the news report that Israel was attacking Lebanon, and there was silence about the constant shelling that has been trying to destroy life in northern Israel since October 8, 2023. How does it feel to live next to a terrorist organization whose only goal is to destroy your country and your people? Well, I felt it for many months. At night, I always slept fully clothed because you never knew if a siren might surprise you in the night. You always had to be ready. The border was very close here, in the kibbutz where I slept, in a house belonging to an evacuated family who kindly allowed me to stay there. When there was a brief moment of silence between the shelling, you almost had the illusion of peace. The kibbutzim in northern Israel are beautiful places. Before the war, there were peaceful places for families and tourists. That was how it seemed that morning too. It was quiet, the sky was blue, and for a moment it seemed almost peaceful. But then Tobias, Alon and I experienced what was probably one of the worst days and the most dangerous of my life. The rockets of Hezbollah reached our kibbutz. Just a few meters decided whether we would survive or not.
Kibbutz Dan, komm. Noch einer. Alter. Geh vom Boden. Scheiße.
It is a miracle that nothing happened to us, because this situation could have turned out very differently. And I am grateful that I'm here and can talk about it now. These recordings that you are about to see were taken that morning.
Auf dem Boden.
Shortly afterwards, we went to the house and place that was hit.
Es brennt da richtig, hier sieht man es auch von hier. Ne?
איפה הנפילה, חבר'ה? איפה? קום, פן. מה נשמע?
איך קוראים למשבר בכלל הבית רואים?
איפה הנפילה?
לנו נכנס רסיס מפה, כמו שאתם רואים.
Hier ist ein Splitter rein ins Fenster. Hier in einem Neubau, das Haus wird hier renoviert.
Hearing a siren is blood-curdling. The sound of it goes deep into your body and shakes you. Hearing it a few times a day is almost unbearable, but you get used to it. I never thought I would last so long in such a war zone, but the people in northern Israel inspired me.
Sarah, hello.
I was also convinced that what we are doing is important. These recordings will one day be part of history and will remind us of what happened this year and how one thing led to another.
Ist es hier eingeschlagen? Hier. Das ganze Haus von den Splittern ist kaputt.
On one of my very first trips to the north of Israel with Alon, I remember a man who stayed in the kibbutz and was not evacuated. He told me that hardly anyone reports on the north, hardly any journalists come, and that it feels as if they are forgotten here. This sentence stayed with me for a long time and touched me deeply and motivated me to try everything to do something about it, so that the people here are not forgotten, so that the suffering of the north of Israel is not forgotten.
Wir sind jetzt hier ist es ja noch näher zum Libanon, wir sind hier ungefähr 900 Meter von der Grenze.
But not every threat is loud, and not every threat is announced by a siren or an explosion. Some threats in a war are very quiet and silent. As one of my friends who is also a soldier said once, the silence is my enemy. That night we were driving in the car, and suddenly we received a message saying there was a possibility that a Hezbollah drone was in the air. We immediately stopped, put on our protective gear, and waited, looking up at the sky. A drone attack is different from a rocket attack. It is quiet, you can hardly hear it, and sometimes it goes undetected because it flies low. You get the paranoid feeling that the drone sees you, but you don't see it. That night we stood on the side of the road and just looked up at the sky, but to this day I remember how great the fear and tension was. I will never forget that night either, even if it doesn't look spectacular on video. And that is maybe the big problem. If you don't experience war and terror with your own eyes, you may not understand how threatening it is and what it really feels like.
Da. Zeig was auf. Da. Da. 2.
What if you remove the sound from the war? What do you then perceive? If you didn't know what you were seeing here, they could almost be shooting stars. After my time in northern Israel, I look at a sky full of stars differently, because in the north of Israel, every light and every moving light in the sky could have meant a real, deadly danger. But now, when you no longer hear anything, it seems almost poetic, and that is the great danger. You don't understand what terror and war mean if you don't experience it and if you don't hear it right where it is happening.
Es hat hier im Kibbutz vor einigen Augenblicken Sirenen gegeben und mehrere richtig heftige Einschläge. Wir stehen hier gerade mit Alon vor den Löscharbeiten. Hier wurde ein LKW getroffen, wie ihr hinter mir sehen könnt. Und was ihr jetzt gleich hier sehen werdet, was das hier hinter mir ist, das ist eine Rakete, die hier eingeschlagen ist vor wenigen Augenblicken. Hier entwickeln sich auch riesige Feuer im Kibbutz. Es ist ein sehr großes Chaos hier, weil wir nicht wissen, ob jetzt noch Beschuss kommen wird.
Wir sind jetzt hier. Wir müssen ruhig sein. Wir sind sehr, sehr nah an der Grenze. Wir hören die Flugzeuge in der Luft.
Alon and I tried to document everything we could during these months. Every attack, every fire, everything. And we did so at constant risk to our lives. I did not share these images at that time, but now I think the time is right. Now that we have a ceasefire, now that after Israel's ground offensive, the majority of society remembers that Israel invaded Lebanon, this shelling by a terrorist organization that lasted for a year is forgotten. The destruction of homes, the terror, Families with their children who have not been able to return to their homes for over a year. Lives that have been destroyed as a result. People who have died. All of this has happened. How long could another democratic state have endured that? We survived those months without any injuries, thank God. We had the opportunity to show you what happened during that time. But no matter how many videos are made, no matter how many photos I took and reports are published, you will never be able to directly capture what it feels like to be in the middle of a war zone, what it feels like to be under fire from a terrorist organization that wants to destroy you. Their only goal is to kill you and your nation. I think people in Germany can hardly imagine what it feels like to live, to have to survive so close to terror. I admire the courage and resilience of the Israelis in the north. I'm especially grateful for Kibbutz Dan, which welcomed me so warmly in the state of war. And I admire the entire Israeli nation, who not only have to live with terror, who not only have to deal with another war and with the endless pain of those murdered and kidnapped on October 7th, but also with the indifference, the coldness, the ignorance, and the hatred of the world. A world that so misunderstands Israel and this region in the Middle East. A world that does not want to understand and often even denies what is happening here, and takes the side of those who are trying to wipe us out. I also believe that our German media are partly to blame for this, because the reporting was very often very one-sided. It was poorly structured. Many things were left out. Many things were not explained. The terror was not called by its name. By downplaying the constant shelling of the Lebanese terrorist organization Hezbollah for almost a year, due to the fact that the fate of the people in northern Israel received little attention in our news and the shelling was also barely reported, the impression was actually created that the situation is not that bad. In this way, Israel's actions were again demonized, and the forces that already hate Jews in the Jewish state were radicalized. All of this really happened in this year, 2024, and all of this is not over yet, although we hope it will be soon. Don't forget the people of Israel. Don't forget the north of Israel. Don't forget our hostages who are still being held captive in Gaza. Don't forget what this country and this nation have been through, and understand the danger that this terror poses, not just for Israel, but for all who want peace and security, for the whole world, and especially for the Middle East. The north of Israel will flourish again, and the people will return home, and we will defeat terror. I believe in it. Am Israel Chai.